It is time for Fischer Friday, part 3 of the 1959 Mar del Plata International Tournament. And as you can see, Bobby tied with Borislav Ivkov for third place, a half a point behind the winners, Ludek Pachman and Miguel Najdorf. And Bobby was in the running right up until the last round. Had he won his last round game, he would have been in a three-way tie for first. And sadly for him, he really had a winning advantage in that final round, but somehow let it slip. We'll see that tonight. It ended up being a draw, so we'll watch that game tonight. But first, let's look at the 12th round against Hector Decio Rossetto, who was born in Bahia Blanca, Argentina, September 8th, 1922. He passed away January 22nd, 2009 at the age of 86. Rossetto was an international master in 1950 and a grand master in 1960. He won the Argentine Championship in 1942, 44, 47, 61, and 1972. He was also South American chess champion at Fortaleza in 1963. He won this tournament, Mar del Plata, 3 times, once in 1949, then again in 52, and finally he won it in 1962. Hector Decio Rossetto. Bobby Fischer, of course, playing on e4, as was his wont. All right, so after e4, we get a Sicilian defense, c5, knight f3, and Rossetto with the French variation. d4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, and a6 is Khan's variation, not the Khan of Caro-Kann, that's Marcus Khan with 2 N's. But this is Ilya Khan with 1 N. Ilya Abramovich Khan, who lived from May 4th, 1909 to December 12th, 1978. He was a Soviet chess player. He was an international master in 1950, but he reached a peak world ranking in 1944. This Ilya Khan I'm speaking of, 13th in the world in 1944. This variation of the Sicilian defense is a flexible line that has been adopted by top players since 1950, including world champion Anatoly Karpov and the English Grandmaster Tony Miles. Now, previously this line was known as Paulsen's variation. You'll recall Louis Paulsen, one of the great players of the previous century, previous to this game, that is. In other words, the 1800s, aka the 19th century. But anyway, Ilya Khan, being a more recent presence in the chess world, supplanted the former great one, and this is now known as Khan's variation. We play c4, and speaking of former greats, Giza Morozzi is the eponym for the Morozzi-Bind formation here, and one of the greatest players of all time was Giza Morozzi. In fact, he has made the Jan Gustafsson / Peter Heine-Nielsen top 50. They've got him ranked 45th. I would rank Morozzi a little higher than that, personally. Queen c7, knight c3, knight f6, bishop d3. More common than bishop d3, I should point out, is pawn a3, and that's going to be answered by b6, bishop e3, bishop b7, super attacking the e-man, which gets defended by f3, pawn d6 here, bishop e2, queen's knight d7. You could also lead with the bishop. It transposes because after castles, bishop e7 is played anyway. Then after rook c1, then you have castles and pawn b4, queen's rook to c8, queen d2, and queen b8. And so you can see it doesn't matter back here whether you right here whether you start with the bishop or the knight. It comes out the same either way, as you can see. Let's go back. Bishop d3, also a book move, but not as common as the line I just showed. Knight c6. Now bishop e3 leaves the opening book. The book move is knight takes knight. And the most common answer to that is queen's pawn takes knight, castles, and e5. Let's go back. Bishop e3 in this game. Knight takes the knight. Knight e5 is more popular, but here Rossetto with knight takes the knight, bishop takes the knight. And now we have the strong threat of e5, don't we? Bishop c5 puts the question to our bishop, and we discover a defense by moving the king's bishop out of the way to c2. e5 still lurking would be a strong and potentially winning move. d6 here to clamp down a little bit, at least a half clamp, on the e5 square. Nonetheless, white has a smidge of an advantage there on the eval bar that you can see on the right side of the chessboard. Hardly worth mentioning, by the way. If it's less than 1 and greater than -1, you can count it as equal. It doesn't have to be dead zero to be equal at the human level. White castles, bishop d7. Now knight to a4. And that gets a question mark. I was thinking bishop a4 might be a move to prevent this pawn from coming forward. After bishop takes bishop, bishop takes bishop check, knight takes bishop, queen takes the bishop on d4, and then black can castle. Another idea back here is to simply take this knight with your bishop, and then after pawn takes the bishop, you can bring your queen into f3, and black has to make a decision. In this game, Bobby plays knight to a4, getting a question mark from the annotator. I haven't studied the Catalan very lately. It's been a long time since I've looked at a Catalan. I have played against the Catalan. In fact, my first tournament chess game that I got to win, the only game I got to win, was I played the black against the Catalan. That was back in 1973. But a very long time since I've seen a Catalan, so I'd have to study it. I could show you that game if you're interested, if I can find it. Anyway, in this game, let's talk about this game. Knight a4. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, rook to d8. The bot calling for bishop takes knight. Yeah, good idea, bishop takes knight. The idea of bishop takes knight is it's a bad bishop, isn't it? So unload your bad bishop, and yeah, I'm giving you check, and you're going to have to keep your king in the center. But apparently, according to the eval bar, the king is safe and sound in the refuge of these pawns. So, trade the bishop off for the knight, says the bot. You could also try e5 here and hit my queen. That seems like a move. It gets a star. And I would probably have to play queen b6 here and see what you want to do. You don't have to trade queens. Take the undefended pawn with your queen. I'll take your undefended pawn on b7. And that hits your rook, so you can't take my bishop or you'll lose your rook. You'll have to castle here first. And that defends that, right, and then I'll have to defend my bishop. So that's another line that could be played. Hector with rook d8. Bobby with king's rook to d1. Now, castles. I can't imagine that being inaccurate. Queen's rook to c1. Remember what I've told you about the supposed inaccuracies that the bot points out. Don't take them too seriously. Queen a5, queen b6. Queen takes the queen. Yeah, queen g5 deserves consideration, and that applies some pressure to this rook here, which means that the rook on d1 is tethered to its compatriot. You cannot come up here and take this pawn, or you will lose your rook followed by your bishop. Oh, I guess you could block with the bishop, but you're losing a lot of material. So that would be quite the move. Also, you cannot capture that with your queen. That would be catastrophic because then the bishop takes the knight, hits the queen, and picks up the knight free for nothing. So queen g5, quite an interesting and subtle move that ties the rook to the first rank. But he just trades the queen off, knight b6, bishop to c6, turning his bad bishop into a better bishop. Pawn f3 defends, knight to d7, knight d5, putting the knight where it could be captured by the pawn. Double exclam for Bobby Fischer. And let's talk about this move. The point is this bishop is trapped, so even if you take my knight, I'm getting my material back, aren't I? The bishop has no safe where to go. But Rossetto did not take with the pawn, he took with the bishop, and after king's pawn takes the bishop, pawn e5, pawn b4, pawn g6, bishop a4, pawn b6. That is meant to prevent my pawn from coming to c5. Creates a nice clamp there. Rook d3, pawn f5, rook a3, knight b8. That gets a question mark. Right, just play a5 here. And that has the added benefit of overworking my b-man. I have to take it, and then this square is available to your knight. So, for example, takes and knight c5. You say, doesn't that just give away another pawn? Well, not exactly. After pawn takes, then rook a8 can be played. Super attacking the bishop, pinning the bishop to my rook. Let's go back. So a5 would have been a nice move. Knight b8 was the choice. Pawn c5. Knight's pawn takes the pawn. Pawn takes the pawn. Pawn takes the pawn. Rook takes the pawn. Now king g7. A reasonable move in my opinion. We are closing very rapidly on the endgame. Rook b3. Rook f7. And the idea of rook f7 is to prevent rook c7 check. But king f6 is worth a try. I still can play check, right? I'll use my b-rook. But you kind of can escape and get some nice active position for your king. And you're still fighting. I do have a passed pawn, though, and that could be problematic. Plus, your knight is enveloped, isn't it? All right, coming back, rook f7 was tried. Now pawn d6. Knight d7 here. Surely now king f6 has to be played. But he tried knight d7, blockading. The bot says e4. My idea is king f6. Right, I guess I could still play. I get a check mark because I think I just play rook c7. And even if you have e4 takes. Okay, you do have a passed pawn, but I'll probably be able to get right behind it. The eval bar gives white a pretty strong edge here. I could double my rooks on the 7th, or I could just put the question to that e-man, right? It gets complicated because then that hangs. I have to trade rooks here. No, I'm picking up the passed pawn. Yeah. Oh, that's a blunder. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, then when the knight, what am I talking about? The knight is hanging. The knight is hanging there. Knight d7. I need more coffee, I think. Rook c7 is played here anyway. And, of course, the idea is to get the pigs on the 7th. Knight f8, and there's your pigs. So rook takes the rook, and pawn takes the rook, hitting the other rook. And this rook-bishop versus rook-knight endgame clearly favors white with this strong passed pawn. Worth 6 points. That one pawn is worth that whole rook, in my humble opinion. You don't want to take this, by the way, with your rook and let the king come and take refuge here. And look at the eval bar. You've just given up your victory. Instead, take this. You've got the hit on the enemy rook, and the promotion square is a light-colored square. Everything is overworked here. We're going to get our bishop to a place where it can cover the c8 square. Or we're going to put, what we're going to do is get our bishop here where it can come here, which means that knight will be frozen there. So rook c8 is played here. Bishop b3, no surprise. The knight cannot come here. And now the knight cannot come here, because if the knight comes to the d7 square, then the bishop comes to e6, and that is fatal. How fatal? Completely fatal. He tries a5 because he has nothing else that can move. a4 locks the a-man in place. h6 now. h3, g5. He's going to run out of pawns to move. g4. F takes g4, H takes g4, and that's where black has resigned because he is in Zugzwang. As mentioned, he's got no winning moves. If he moves either pawn, he just loses either pawn, depending on which one he moves. If he moves his knight, he's lost. And if he moves his king, that undefends the knight, so we skewer the rook and the knight, and he's lost. He can't take without allowing the promotion. He can't take the pawn without allowing me to capture with check. And therefore, it was here that black resigned the game. Very, very good technique by Bobby Fischer in that game. The numbers are as follows. Decio Rossetto had a good showing. He scored an accuracy of 90.6, but Bobby's accuracy was 96.9. 2850 single game rating for Fischer, 2550 game rating for Rossetto. Just basically, Rossetto got outplayed because they had an impeccable opening. Both players did. They had a well-fought middle game, but the end game precision by Bobby Fischer simply outshined his opponent. Yeah, very instructive there at the end. That Zugzwang was so instructive because it's not the most obvious Zugzwang, but that bad knight is the part that really... You can't even come this way, by the way, in case you're wondering, because now that square becomes available. And once again, you're losing your rook. You're losing the game, because even if you were to move your rook somewhere along the way over here, it's irrelevant because I'm promoting with a discovered check. So it's fatal, right? It is completely hoffnungslos. You've got to move your king. That's hot. So if you move this way, right? No, I can't. I don't want to take that. It's covered. But yeah, let's just get a magic square checkmate. Or if you move this way, I'll back up my rook and bring in my queen. My rook. That guy. Rooks have the flat hats. Bishops have the pointy hats.